Hello there, my name is Mooseman and today I'm here to inform you of whether you should play, wait or avoid the puzzle platformer Circa Infinity. As always, we will be looking at gameplay, aesthetics, value, and future potential before making a final verdict on the release version of Circa Infinity. Circa Infinity is a bizarre puzzle platformer in which your objective is to reach the center of each circular stage that leads into even more circular stages. The only two abilities that you have in addition to moving around is the ability to jump and the ability to dodge. And you'll have to time your jumps carefully as enemies will also be circling around the levels to impede your progress. You can traverse both the inner and outer layer of the circle, which makes up the basis of how the level progresses. However, only a small conical portion of the outer circle will actually lead to the inner circle. While the premise of Circa Infinity may seem overly simplistic, Circa Infinity is an astonishingly good platforming title. In fact, it sets the bar to what I will come to expect out of indie puzzle platformers in the future in terms of how well the game expands upon its basic concept. The progression and the pace of the game are nearly perfect. Each time you finish a world and think that the game couldn't possibly get any more challenging, you are immediately thrown into a brand new situation that requires you to work twice as hard to get to the next level. The game is always challenging right from the start, but the magnitude that the game's difficulty reaches without changing the basic mechanics of the game is insane. The first world in the game has you simply jumping and dodging enemies. By the third world you'll be controlling not one, but two characters simultaneously, and by the final world you have to deal with not only being able to transfer between layers, but only between layers of matching colors. Focusing on everything on the map is the hardest thing to being successful in Circa Infinity. While you may know the exact solution to the stage, you'll pretty much go cross-eyed attempting to figure out how to look at everything from enemy movement, your character, and the location of the entry point simultaneously. This feeling of being overwhelmed is further enhanced by the unfamiliar nature of playing in a circular stage, creating a game that is brutally hard to progress in if you don't have a firm grasp on what you're attempting to do. Each time you die in a stage, you are sent back to a previous stage, which ends up removing any semblance of luck from your chances of success. While there are approximately 500 plus individual stages at least in the game throughout the 50 levels and 5 worlds, most of the stages are designed to be progressively harder versions of the previous stage. Each time you enter a new level, the first stage will introduce you to a new concept that the rest of the level will be based on. This can vary from a new enemy type to completely changing the requirements for you to progress, but the game will always make sure to ease you into it before really challenging your skill. Each enemy in the game serves its own unique function. After a few levels you will quickly learn which enemies jump, which enemies are stationary, and which enemies traverse multiple layers or even across multiple stages. In addition to standard levels, you will also have to face a boss at the end of each world. These bosses emphasize the trait the world introduced and will test your ability to the absolute limit. Unlike the previous levels in the world, getting hit by a boss will immediately reset you to the beginning of the fight, requiring you to avoid every single attack that the boss throws at you. While most of the gameplay was entirely positive, the final boss point was actually a real disappointment. The previous boss battles were the most challenging levels in the world, but for some reason the very final boss in the game took only a few seconds to beat and the solution was immediately obvious. While I don't normally nitpick, it just felt so anticlimactic and marginalized all the challenge and improvements that you had made during the course of the game. The aesthetics in Circa Infinity are immediately what will hit you when you first start playing the game. The game's retro minimalistic style applied to the circular levels allows you to focus peripherally on the surrounding dangers as the environment spins and changes without you having to shift your focus off of your character. Like older retro games, the enemies are simplistic sprites, but are distinct enough that you will immediately be able to recognize who each enemy is and what abilities they have. While sometimes I believe bit style and retro style graphics are overused in indie games, anything more graphically intense than what is presented in Circa Infinity would just get in your way of completing the levels. The enemies that can hurt you are all colored bright red, which helps you distinguish which enemies on which layers you will need to avoid, since certain enemies from previous stages can still hit you. The only aspect I'm slightly undecided on is the choice to have a purposely un-anti-aliased look. The sprites and the world are jagged, And I actually have emphasis put on the fact that the game has no anti-aliasing, and while it doesn't impede the gameplay, it's definitely a stylistic choice that won't appeal to everyone. The theming in Circa Infinity is extremely bizarre. Beyond your goal to reach the center of infinity, there really isn't much of a story or plot. However, the act of crying and the yin versus yang are repeatedly brought up in a variety of ways throughout the game. The final part of the aesthetics I would like to emphasize is the soundtrack. The soundtrack and the overall audio in the game is phenomenal. Each track is catchy and memorable and provides great background music without overstepping onto the gameplay. Circa Infinity is priced at $10, and at that price the game is a steal. Beating the game during your first run will take you at least 4 to 6 hours depending on your skill, as there are a total of 50 sets of levels, each containing around 10 stages each. In addition to the standard mode, there is also a speedrun mode, which focuses on recording your best time possible through each set. The Circa Infinity developers have also utilized the Steam achievements that will provide you additional challenges if you want even more replayability. Throughout my playthrough, I never once felt bored or that the gameplay went stale. The intensity of focus required to progress the game left no time to even consider being bored. Circa Infinity is a game that I felt I got my full money's worth, and anything added in the future would only be icing on the cake. The simplistic nature of the game leaves all sorts of possibilities for the introduction of new mechanics, which may come in the form of DLC or a sequel in the future. A multiplayer mode may be interesting as well, and would represent the ultimate challenge that I feel Circa Infinity could provide. Completing levels on my own was challenging enough. Cooperating with a friend would bring a whole new level of depth to the game. Circa Infinity is a challenging, unique, and most importantly fun game that exemplifies both the puzzle and platforming elements equally to create not just a technically challenging platformer, but also one that will force you to think if you ever want to have a chance of beating the game. The game is extremely challenging, to the point of frustration sometimes, but that frustration usually always ends in satisfaction after you finally accomplish the solution. If you like puzzle platformers, I highly recommend that you play Circa Infinity immediately. The game has a good price and great gameplay above and beyond what I expected from this indie platformer. Thank you for watching my play, wait, or avoid review of Circa Infinity. If you would like to buy the game, a link to the Steam store page is in the description below, in addition to the link to the developer website where you can get a DRM free copy if that is your preference. There is also a free demo available on the Steam store, and I highly recommend that you download that as well if you wish to try the game. And if you would like to see more of my content, subscribe and check out my channel where I do reviews, news, and other gaming commentary, such as my review of Energy Hook, a spiritual successor to Spider-Man 2 with its high-speed web-slinging parkour, or last week's episode of PC Gaming News Weekly.